Hi friends, did you know that from about the 70s of the last century, all young runners faced a very difficult choice? Many of them broke their heads. What kind of company to choose when buying cross-country shoes and friends? It was this time that can be called the era of fierce competition between such heavyweights of this business as New Balance, Adidas, or some more well-known in our time called Legs. The choice, in fact, for most was not so easy. But, as they say, who does not take risks does not drink champagne. That's how once you buy a certain one, you will never be able to change your shoes into something else. Starting the most ordinary running shoes, today it occupies the first and confident place in the list of suppliers. Shoes for all basketball players in the United States of America, and its cost is estimated at the most minimal and modest estimates, in the unrealistic $86 billion. And by the way, this is the highest cost among other brands in the sports industry. According to the results of marketing research, unfortunately, almost 90% of the goods presented on the modern market under this label, alas, are fake. But even despite all this, we remain loyal to this particular brand. Today, it's not just an American brand. This is one of the largest companies that create not only sportswear, shoes and accessories. And, of course, fashion in general as a way of thinking and a continuous desire to conquer new horizons. In fact, the history of this company is so incredibly fascinating that it makes you think that absolutely any of us, sitting now on a soft sofa in front of the screen of our monitor, can reach the highest peaks and write our name into history for centuries. Do not believe in vain. Because the hero of our video was no different. Except, of course, perseverance and a great desire to create something new and incredible, and only after going through a huge number of obstacles and struggles did he succeed. So what actually began this sports era? Who came up with this world-famous Miyake brand, what he had to endure and how he achieved such unprecedented heights? We will talk about this today. The history of this brand is quite young, while many other famous brands can already boast of a centenary. A start was made, not so far away in 1957, at the University of Oregon. After all, it was there that the two creators of the brand met for the first time, and it is worth it. It must be noted that at the time when they had just had their first meeting, there were no skills at all. The Adidas brand had already seized dominance on all continents. Olympic champions and winners of the World Cup performed in its shoes. And this is more to make it clear to all of us that it never begins fasting. Beat, one of the founders from early childhood, was developed beyond his years. True, then he dreamed of becoming a doctor and even visited privately. Extracurricular activities in biology and chemistry. He sat for hours on textbooks, studying the structure of the human body and so on. But unexpectedly for the family, as a 13-year-old boy, he makes a decision and joins the basketball team, giving all his free time a little later, realizing that sports bring him more pleasure than books. Having gained experience and improved his playing skills, he beat and decided to give the sport his whole life. So already in 1934, he begins his coaching career in the city of Portland, having earned good coaching authority in the person of his wards. He unexpectedly stopped his sports career for everyone. The reason for this was the attack on Pearl Harbor, well known in history, after which he, having abandoned everything, decided to join the American Army, and later even became the best soldier in his unit, having already returned from the war in 1945. Bill received 4 bronze and 1 silver star for meritorious service in the US Army. Eventually, after walking a few months after the end of the war, they became bored with sports. A young, matured guy decided to return to his coaching career, as befits a real, former athlete and military man. He is given to his work like no other all the time. Bill is immersed in the idea of how not just to improve the quality of training of his athletes, but to change the approach to sports in general, and in particular, he thinks about their equipment. As our hero later said in an interview, "Thoughts materialize only when your hands start doing something, and I had an old one in my garage, a sewing machine, and I also had a hammer and 2 hands." In principle, this is already enough to begin the history of a great corporation. Yes, friends just like that, returning home after work in the evenings, sitting in their garage. He is trying to flash his first sneakers for this much knowledge. No need. The main thing is to understand what you want to get out of it. Bill independently modeled the sole for them. They look for a material that is more convenient for work and tries in every possible way to find this golden mean between quality and convenience. Everything would be possible and only ideas would remain. And we would defy nightly never hear such word, as some once the life of a coach changes tremendously and unexpectedly. When on one of the most ordinary days he meets Phil Knight, a young, modest guy from Portland, journalism students at the University of Oregon. By the way, Phil was one of hundreds of students who have devoted themselves to sports since childhood. The thing is that for about 3 years Phil played in the school baseball team, His game did not bring any results for the team, and soon the boy was moved from the field to the bench, and after a couple of months he was completely expelled from the team. Of course, this left a serious mark on his life and, as he later even said himself, "After I was kicked out of the team, as unnecessary and useless. I came home and threw all my equipment into the trash and promised myself that from now on the sport in my life is over." But our guy, like no one else, was lucky with his parents. One day, looking at a frustrated son who had already stopped believing in himself, still knowing ridicule from classmates and former teammates over the loser Phil, Mom suggested that he take up running. "Well, stop being sad. Let's try something new." It was after these words that the boy decided to try to test himself again, and as it turns out later, he was not mistaken. Having already matured and, having become a millionaire, in one of his interviews, Phil Knight will say such words to his mother and our first coaches, hooking half the country with these words. At the university there was an athletics team that was considered one of the best in the country. This is how, having little experience and achievements in sports, he easily becomes a runners. Of course, not the best, but not the worst. Stately, high of good data, the beat quickly noticed his potential. By the way, the bartender was somewhat reminiscent of Phylan. Father. He was just as impenetrable, stingy with praise, demanding and at the same time modest. Beat taught the young strength. They only sport, but also taught him not to focus on the result and constantly improve their skills. And the most important thing is to never give up, and as a result for the entire time of studying at this university, he won prizes in competitions more than once, paying tribute to his brilliant coach. But be that as time went on, Phil Knight graduated from the university and entered Stanford. Having defended his term paper on the prospects for the development of production in Japan, he beat at that time he also worked as a coach. He strived to improve everything around him. But even though their paths diverged a little, they still maintained a warm relationship of forces. Perceived Bill more as a father and mentor, and Bill himself had paternal feelings for the guy. Perhaps this is what will help them build this empire in the future. After all, no matter how it was on his miracle sneakers from the garage, the coach did not tell anyone not to be laughed at by anyone but strength. In 1962, the 24-year-old Nike receives an invitation to travel to Japan and, having packed his bags, sets off on his first long journey, getting acquainted with the culture of this country and the peculiarities of its market. This one comes with a brilliant idea. He understands that shoes made in Japan are ideal for professional athletes in America, especially since they are much cheaper and can be an excellent alternative to more expensive ones. By the way, at that time the most common bulky and not very comfortable sneakers, or something in around $5 Sapporo. And professional sneakers, from Adidas, could be bought for at least $30, as the American market was dominated by more and more European brands. The collapsed economy of Japan after the war only gained momentum. Many now well-known brands sold their goods only in Japan and could not even dream of transporting goods overseas, and our hero decided to take advantage of this. Knowing the traction of his former coach, comfortable practical shoes, Phil calls from Japan to Bill balance with incredible emotions about what he saw there. In particular, he liked the Japanese Tiger sneakers. For those who do not know, now it's Alex. You know, I hold them in my hands and I think that they are interesting, but I would change a few things. Phil on the phone to his coach, maybe it's worth transferring them to the USA, and you'll see what Bill only answered, of course. They brought the first sneakers brought from Japan. Both of our heroes liked it and inspired. Phil decided, why not buy a trial batch directly at the factory and sell it here in the USA, and at that time the market was already occupied by such monsters as Adidas. But at the same time, the guy was counting on a small place for himself. The key was that the cost of the specially made in Japan was much lower than the cost of the German Adidas. And this meant that they could not find their buyer in the same year. Phil, with burning eyes and ideas about creating his own business selling sports shoes, flies back to Japan and finds the contacts of the Tiger factory through the telephone directory. I just flew over there and called them. I said that I like their shoes, and I would like to try to sell them in the USA, or maybe I was very naive, but I wanted to open my own business so much that it didn't bother me at all, and, oddly enough, I was told to come after. When the still young 24-year-old Phil Knight met with the director of the Tiger factory and announced his plans to him, they contracted a small sneaker import with no problem. But as you understand, just buy sneakers. Not so complicated, complex, then sell it, especially when it is an unknown brand, and at the same time not having the inability to do so, or even its warehouse, and most likely 99% of people, as always, would be looking for a bunch of excuses. Why is this a bad idea? And why won't it work? But Phil did not think so. It is not known that it was perhaps youthful enthusiasm, but he simply decided to act. The first trial batch arrived at the seaport. In just a few weeks, Phil personally loaded 300 boxes of sneakers into his car to save time and money. He brought them not to my oxide warehouse in the garage, sometime later as a warehouse. He also began to use the laundry, located in his parents' house. Of course, the guy did not have a store, and therefore his own minivan becomes the daughter of the retail trade. This would convey to this idea the high cost and popularity. In the end, Phil comes up with new names for his sneakers. Already the first batch bore the proud name of Fornication Ibn Sports about the supply of its goods to stores. There was no question, since the guy simply could not put his sneakers on store shelves, because he decided not to register his company because of the high cost of this process. How will he tell? He himself, after many years, all the money he had. He invested in the first batch of crosses. It's probably hard right now. Believe it, but this is how the future was sold for several months. Legendary skills right on the street, from a regular van to minibuses, from hand to hand, in order to find a good place to promote your product. He moves from place to place every day. Sometimes he had to hide from the police, as he conducted unauthorized street trading. It was against the law. But be that as it may, he did not give up, and soon the entire batch of 300 units was sold. He decided not to bother with the price tag, and therefore he simply set a fixed price of $10 for all pairs. A huge plus in his endeavors was the fact that the Tiger Factory really made a very high quality and competitive product. As they say, they were not ashamed, which was to be expected out loud. These were people who couldn't afford the big names, but still wanted to wear good shoes. It is also worth noting that Phil was a very good seller. As a young guy, and even athletes, he quickly established contact with a potential buyer and could convince him to buy knowledge in the field of sports. It meant a lot. People trusted him. Already a year later, the profit of a 26-year-old guy was $8,000 a month, which was very cool. It was good then, and still is. And put the sneakers increased each time by several hundred pairs. Since Nida was practically himself involved in the whole process while spending money, he simply did not have all the profits received. He invests again and again in new lots, leaving money only for food, like a pitchfork, and spent 2 years buying and selling goods with his car in 1966, when the guy was already 28. He, having saved up some money, opens his first workshop in a small Santa Monica building with a proud signboard with sports, where, both selling shoes and trying to sew something with his own hands, he quickly realizes that things are going uphill. Phil decides to expand his team, of course. The first one to join the ranks was the sport, becomes his coach. Beat our mind. They so kept in touch, had every way to advise the guy to get involved in the business. Didn't take it until Phil asked for his help, as you would expect. The coach, leaving his job, goes to help the guy with the joint efforts of their sale. In just a few weeks, they grew several times. Their business was directly built on personal contacts of both. Almost all batches of sneakers were sold to familiar athletes and coaches, realizing that this was a good business beat. Inspired by his unrealizable dream, he starts looking for investors to set out the beginning from this own sneaker. Unfortunately, due to many factors, the idea does not find a response from the entrepreneurs. Not retreating, Beat continues to spend his evenings in the garage, making shoes on his own. Of course, he is experimenting with dozens of materials, trying to find the ideal lightweight elastic, but as a trainer, he was most worried about the sole, and if you really want to do something and don't give up, then you will definitely succeed. After all, no matter how strange it was, Bill came to that very first insight only in the late 60s, when at breakfast, he drew attention to the waffle iron, from which his wife had just taken out a freshly baked castle on the same day, using the same waffle iron, for which he later grabbed from his wife, as well as latex skin to her. He created the first prototype. It's amazing, isn't it true? A year later, the company is replenished with one more employee. It becomes Jeff Johns Tire, part-time former rival of Phil Knight in the university race. Jeff is entrusted with a very exciting job. He drives his van around all the track and field competitions, thus selling sneakers to professional athletes. Along the way, he makes new acquaintances in the field of sports, asking about what kind of athletes see running shoes. That's how easy and free he received up to valuable information, which will later be used to create a market strategy to find. By the way, it was Jeff who came up with the idea of renaming the company. Once in a dream, a beautiful girl in white came to him. She introduced herself as the goddess of victory. Of course, Joseph shared his sons with colleagues, suggesting the idea to rename the company and come up with a new and memorable logo in 1969. The team again expands to 20 employees and several retail stores, and the company's annual turnover grows to $300,000 in 1971 year. Phil and Beal still begin to think about designing the Beal logo, inviting one of his students named Caroline David Sheen to the team. Transferring dozens of options proposed by Caroline, businessmen install on the famous "with your logo" and symbolizing movement in wings, depicted by the statue of the very goddess Nikki. Phil openly declares that he does not like the picture, but honestly promises to get used to it. $35 on the train, having gained worldwide fame and millions in profits, the founders of the company. Of course, they thanked the girl, giving her a part of the company's shares, a soft and gold ring with the company's logo adorned with a diamond, but that was much later. In the meantime, all this young guard, namely those, they were in big business, still huddled in a small office on the outskirts. If before that, forever, I sold models. Tiger, simply with its own individual name, soon the company began not only to resell Japanese sneakers, but also to order tailoring of shoes of its own design. The first successful model of the brand was sneakers, called RTS. They were all hemmed at the same factory in Japan, but exclusively for themselves. It is them who can be called the very first real Nakes, but no one could even imagine what would happen a little later, and it is worth noting that Cortez blew up the market share of their sales in the rest of the company's line was a huge business quickly gaining momentum. Sales grew every day, but along with the rapid success, the first problems also come. The same shoe supplier, having learned about the success in the American film market, and also has its own ambitions to open branches, the United States refuses to cooperate with the company, depriving the distributor of exclusive rights. As a result, all problems lead to litigation, at the end of which brands no longer receive shoes from Japan, but can use Tiger's developments for about 6 months, after which they must completely stop trading. Brought shoes. These were the first big problems in the company, choosing a strategy for further development. Even the question of closing the business as a whole was raised, but the network spent long evenings going through possible suppliers. Our heroes came to a consensus: until there is no online, the same shoes can happen at any moment the most, and they will again be left with nothing. The only way out of this situation was to sew shoes and develop our own models. That is how experimenting with materials and collecting feedback from professional athletes. In 1972, Kim's sneakers were developed. He shows that the most waffle outsole. It is she who will later become revolutionary, due to the tight adhesion to the surface and a high level of wear resistance. This model quickly becomes in demand more often among athletes and football players, and the shelves of stores on this white are quickly empty. They even had to open another workshop, but the number of orders exceeded the supply, realizing that now is the right time to reach a new level. Phil begins a fast-paced search for distributors and investors. Just a week later, the office receives about 5 letters from investors who are ready to help promote the company and will soon start up a new sales market in Canada. By the end of 1972, the company's income grows many times, thereby motivating Bill and his forces to conquer higher peaks, and they both understood that they needed profitable cooperation by professional athletes. Through their connections and Bill's athletic background, the company is enlisting the support of up-and-coming and famous athletes of the day ahead of the Olympics. It was a great moment to declare itself to the whole world, and it was a shock for everyone when in 1976 most of the athletes came out in yucky sneakers. Then, by and large, few people heard them in America. And what can we say about Europe, where by that time everyone was obsessed with Adidas? But what is most surprising is the athletes. The Olympians came out in a t-shirt absolutely free as advertising. They performed at the Olympics in branded sneakers with this emblem. Many of them were later generously thanked by Phil and White, when, many years later, they received checks with 6 zeros as a token of gratitude. Some of them ended in great sports, but still live luxurious lives. Thanks to the fact that the founders did not forget to find them, everything was fair. They helped. Some forgot about them since the brands no longer missed a single sporting event in their sneakers. World records were set and gold medals were mined. The white dream came true. Phil simply did not believe in what was happening. 1979th year becomes the year and the famous air technology R. It was in this year that aviation space engineer Frank Gunn sent a letter to the company, where he proposed to change the soles of sneakers using its air cushion manufacturing. In his opinion, thanks to them, the sole will remain soft, springy and comfortable for long-term wear longer. Of course, they could not miss such a chance of Gunn's. They were invited to a meeting where they signed a cooperation agreement. A month later, the idea was realized. She released another running shoe with improved soles already in 1980. Nike running shoes became the most recognizable and sold in the US and Canada, overtaking its rival Adidas. Due to such rapid sales, the company makes a number of strategic decisions. She completely abandons the former name of Blue Sportage, launches the first line of sneakers for children and begins the production of clothing for professional athletes. But the technology of Frank Guns was really used only in 1987, when the company released the first collections of Air Max and Trailer Hayek, SCO, the feature of which became transparent, a window in the sole, through which one could easily view the very same shock-absorbing pillow. A year later, the company releases another Model P, thus becoming almost annual, replenishing the ranks of the collection of Air Technology sneakers. Do not also forget that from the very beginning of his journey, Phil Knight, his white partner set themselves one single goal in order to achieve recognition and success. They must help athletes overcome themselves with the help of comfortable shoes and clothes. It is by adhering to this principle that already in 1985, the leadership of the Foot signed the most successful contract in the history of the company with the newcomer of the Chicago team, the Bulls' Michael Jordan, a talented, but still little known by that time basketball player changes product design 180 degrees. Basketball shoes were Michael's Converse sneakers changed everything. Shoe release. Even before the start of sales made a splash. Fans of the usual connoisseurs of the brand signs for several days took the cue to be among the first fuel on the fire, adding Jordan themselves. A few days before the official start of sales, he was arrested for being at the NBKI games. He was wearing black and red sneakers signs. While the rest of the players were shod in white shoes, Michael was fined $1,000, and the NBA commissioner and generally forbade him to wear sneakers to the games, but there was no stopping them. The success was worldwide. The first Air Jordan was followed by the second, the third, which became the most beloved basketball shoe of all time by the Air Jordan designer. 3 became what Hadfield was. It was he who improved the nose, made the sneakers lighter, added details from durable luxury leather, with a texture reminiscent of ivory. And of course, I worked on the sole, making it with visible air cushions. By the way, after the fine, they used unique opportunities for advertising. They paid all the fines for Jordan, but they obliged him to play only in the sensational red-black high-top Air Jordan. But here is such a cunning advertising move that brought a couple of $1 million more to the company's piggy bank. By accident or design, 1988 becomes the year of fitness and running, making the company's products even more in demand. Yes, and the sensational advertising campaign, Jazz Blowing, involving only the most famous and influential athletes, clearly played into the hands of the brand. Popular today, models designed specifically for running are becoming the most popular in the entire range of Miyake. When it was created, a special technology was used, so it is made of neoprene material that fits the foot tightly. But the heel area was provided with a polyurethane insert, due to which the foot was tightly held in the sneakers. By the end of the 90s, in the state of Oregon, a World Center opens on 53,000 square meters, forever consisting of 7 buildings named after the most famous athletes who previously collaborated with the company in the same year. The largest retail store, better known as the City, opens in Portland in 1999. The World Center expands. The North Campus appears with 3 more buildings and a football field on the territory. And the number of workers increases to 4,500 people. Unfortunately, in 1999, one of the founders of the company, Bill the bartender, dies, forever perpetuating his name in the history of Miyake. His sports traditions, competitive spirit and determination still inspire everyone who works in this company. At that time he was already 88 years in the year 2000. In honor of the memory of Bill the bartender, they are forever releasing special sneakers that fit. For people with different foot shapes, the breast model is much lighter than other models and fits perfectly to the article due to non-traditional dimensional grids. In 2001, the company's priorities are slightly modified. Their possibilities. A year later, the company still acquires shares of the Converse Inc. brand, significantly expands its production. A little later, Fine signs a collaboration with Apple. This is how a special sensor appears in some models of sneakers, which collects training data and, by joint efforts, the world gets acquainted with the service, a certain plus that turned any. The concept of sports, as well as with smart watches and sports applications, thanks to which sports become innovative and accessible to everyone. In the year 2008, the company begins cooperation with the New Foundation and is actively involved in the education of girls from the Third World. A year later, they support another initiative, Shoelace, in the name of life in company stores. Special shoelaces appear, part of the proceeds from the sale of which goes to the World AIDS Fund almost every year. The Soft brand organizes tournaments and competitions in order to spread a healthy lifestyle not only among the adult population of the planet, but also teenagers and even children also. The company is increasingly trying to use in the manufacture of clothing and footwear. Only environmentally friendly materials or materials that can be recycled. For example, in 2010, the brand released a collection of clothing for football players made entirely from recycled plastic. Friends, of course, we also cannot ignore the famous skill disputes or Adidas. The rivalry between the two sports giants has been going on for days. And it didn't start at all yesterday. According to GQ, today Nike owns an unrealistic 62% of the entire sports market, while Adidas is only 5%. What's more, Adidas spend 3 times as much money on advertising promotion than Brent's feet. A significant advantage is the fact that all uniforms for the NBKI are made by them. This is such a cunning move that does not make Nike spend billions on advertising, promotion. People themselves give preference to this brand unconsciously, leaving aside. Still, Nike suffered significant losses in this dispute between 2010 and 2150. 3 important and necessary designers left the company. Denis Genadevich, Mark, Dolce and Macro Mayer. And what brand do you think they work with right now? The Trinity successfully defected to Adidas, and in response to this, Nike filed a lawsuit for $10 million, claiming that the designers declassified some of the brand's developments. Of course, the Trinity did not stand aside, and they also filed a counterclaim in 2015, and the problems were settled. However, the details of this case are still unknown, even though the leadership in this conflict surely belongs to Mecca. It is possible that in the future, 3 Stripes will still become the leader in the sports market. As for the main and only owner of the company now, Phil Knight, he was in the chair of the head of the company, until the year 2004. At least he handed over the reins of government to the hands of William, and Phil never left. Despite his advanced age, he is now 82 years old, and he continued to occupy his place, until the year 2016, as chairman of the board of directors as a bestialist. This is a huge number of fateful decisions, both for the Nike company and for the sports shoe market. In general, now the bulk of shoes and clothing are made in the United States, part in China and Vietnam, and the total value of the company's shares as of August 2019 was $86 billion. Today Nike is a global corporation, expanding its product range monthly, developing raw materials for new models, strict production quality control, a staff of professional specialists and impressive production volumes. All this is huge, family, legs. The future begins at the level of the community street and with a common goal. Bill B was so dissatisfied with the Comey running spikes that existed in his time, made of heavy leather and metal, that he made his own shoes that won the hearts of millions of athletes. Phil just had one cherished dream: to make the world of sports a much better place. It was thanks to this, as well as his ambitions and desire, that he managed to create a giant corporation. He was able not only to preserve the sports traditions that existed even before his recognition, but also to improve them, introducing a share of innovation and his undying fighting spirit into them, and, as it turned out, the formula for success was very simple: hard work, passion for sports, and the creation of models 100% corresponding to the lifestyle of the target audience. Well, if someone says that something in this world is unreal, just remember Phil Knight, who not so long ago was selling microphones to no one in his van and hiding from the police, constantly changing his location. Everything is really worth it only to want friends. Well, probably, it's time to ask you this question: Nike or Adidas? Write your opinion in the comments. But for today, perhaps you are evaluating all this video, and see you soon. Bye.